All right, I'm at the Red House with Eddie Huffman, old friend of mine, and I am glad that you were able to make it over today.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Hell yeah. So, what you been up to?
Uh, Finished the first draft of my new book this summer, which was an epic project. Took me 5 years. It's supposed to be 2 years.
Hell yeah.
Doing a biography of Doc Watson for University of North Carolina Press.
Damn.
And Doc had a long, complicated life. There was a lot of story to tell there, and talked to a lot of interesting people. So it was quite a project.
Well, this is a brand new endeavor. Of course, we'll reserve. I'm sure I probably have enough questions about that could last us for two or 3 hours.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
reserve as much as I can.
Yeah.
So this took you a little longer than you expected.
Oh
you
my
said.
God. Yeah.
How's that happen?
It was part of it was my first book, the John Prine book over here. I got very little cooperation, which was frustrating, but did it anyway. And so with this one, I didn't get full cooperation from everybody I wanted to talk to. His daughter being the main, Doc's daughter being the main holdout, and she's kind of not cooperative with a lot of people, from what I've been told. So I was not terribly surprised. But talked to tons of people that played with Doc, that knew him from childhood. Just people out in California that would go see him play, and he'd go to their guitar shop, and just on and on and on. Just had a lot of good stories and a lot of good sources, and that just kind of snowballed into a pretty epic experience. Yeah, I tracked down a guy. There were some odd little things that I was trying to. They were frustrating because I thought there was probably some interesting stories there, but they were not going anywhere, and just kept digging and digging. And one thing was Doc played in Mexico City during the 1968 Olympics. And that was the thing everybody remembers about that Olympics is where the two guys did the Black Power salute on the stand after they won won medals. Doc wasn't there that night, as far as I can tell, but he was around for kind of in the middle of all that, and happened to find I won't get too far into the weeds here, but found an oral history thing online with a guy who worked for the State Department. And one little sentence or two in that oral history, he mentioned that he escorted Doc and Merle around Mexico City during the Olympics in 1968. So, oh, that's interesting. And he's still alive and well, so I tracked him down, and he had some good stories about taking Doc and Merle around Mexico City.
Damn.
And that same year, and this is another thing that's there's just a little bit of information out there, but that same year he went to Africa. The State Department sent him to Africa, to 5 small countries in kind of South Central Africa, Malawi, and I'd have to go back and look. But, and I would ask people, it's did Doc ever talk about going to Africa? And they'd go, yeah, he said it was really hot. It's well, that's a whole chapter right there. So it was really frustrating not getting good stories about Doc. I knew there had to be some stories there.
Right.
And finally, Gwen, my partner, put me in touch with a friend of hers named Sunshine, who works for the State Department now. And she connected me to some State Department archives in the cultural program of the State Department. Their archives are at the University of Arkansas. And turns out they had photos of Doc and Merle in Africa in their archives, which as far as I know are not really out there. And so they sent me copies of the photos, just emailed me photos. And there's a shot of Doc and Merle playing with the Kachamba brothers. And I'm like, okay, maybe the Kachamba brothers are still around. And started looking into them, and they are both dead, to the guys that played music. But a guy who played with them and writes books about music himself, he's an Austrian professor. He's still alive and well and toured for a while with one of the Kachamba brothers. And I called his office in Austria, and they said, oh, he's in Malawi or wherever it is now. Here's how to reach him there. And I called him there. Turned out he was staying with a guy who's in one of those photos with Doc and Merle from 1968.
Holy hell.
So just, that kind of thing. It's everything I'd look into, I'd find this just kind of rich little vein of stories and people.
Man.
And so, like I said, it just kind of snowballed from, what I thought was a pretty simple, or I don't know if simple project's the word for it, but it just got a lot more sort of in-depth and complex than I was expecting going into it.
Which is a way better reason to get held up, than like what I didn't have enough to write about.
Yeah, for sure.
That's awesome, man. I mean, just the fun fantasy of a life like that kind of maps all over the world in some kind of mysterious way. It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
To be the person like trying to put all that together.
Yeah. And I talked to people who were there when he first started playing Greenwich Village in the early '60s, part of the folk scene. Like he started playing New York around the time Dylan arrived, and I talked to John Sebastian from The Lovin' Spoonful and John Cohen, who's a great photographer and documentary filmmaker, and talked to those kinds of people and people who worked at his record companies and just all walks of life. People connected with him over the years, so it was a really fun project. The problem now is it's really long, and it's probably gonna have to be cut down a good bit because it's about 4 times as long as the Prine book as it stands now. So we're still in the early stages of editing and deciding how long it's going to be and what's going to happen next. So,
well, man, I'm excited for this. And congratulations on the achievement.
Yeah.
So, but you said something about both these books that maybe I don't really fully understand. Like, what is the lack of sort of enthusiasm about maybe giving full cooperation to somebody doing a project like what you're doing? What does that tend to be about?
You don't always know. And with Doc especially, like I said, his daughter has a reputation for not being very cooperative with people. So there may just be that's just kind of how she is. But his manager did say that Doc resisted the idea of a biography, although there's already been one out. And he was so open in his interviews over the years, and there was very little he wouldn't talk about, as far as I can tell. I mean, there may be lots of things that I don't know that he didn't talk about, but his life is kind of an open book, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it just kind of, I didn't really have any qualms about doing a biography on him. I feel like it's just kind of putting together a lot of what's already out there and adding some good stories on top of that. And another guy I would like to have talked to was T. Michael Coleman, who played bass with Doc for years and years. And I found out he was writing his own memoir, so I expect that may have had been at least part of his resistance. Was that,
I see.
He never got back to me, but it may have been that he had his own thing going and was not going to be a part of my thing. I don't know. He never really told me anything. I just never got any response from him, so I don't really know what his thinking was there.
Yeah.
And with Prine, there was kind of an interesting conversation. I ended up hearing from somebody who knew Prine and really liked the book, and knew Prine's manager, who died around the time the book came out, Al Bonetta, who was Prine's manager for most of his career. And this guy basically said that Bonetta was kind of too much of a guard dog and just kind of kept everybody at bay and was overprotective. And heard from more than one person that they thought Bonetta was maybe not the best guy, especially later in Prine's career. That that he was maybe a little bit older and out of touch, and just he needed. And Prine did sort of change up the way he did things after his wife and one of his sons kind of took over his career and record company and all that after Bonetta died. And he just started working a lot more with younger artists. I think had more of a presence on social media, just kind of was putting himself out there in a different way than he had before that.
Yeah.
So I think, Bonetta was at least part of the problem. And he actually talked to me one time. I kept sort of pestering the record company, and, they were like the record company and management company, Oh Boy Records, and, hoping to get an opening with Prine. And one time I found some old concert reviews I'd done that I had kind of misplaced. And it's like, oh, here's some more stuff I wrote about John over the years. And really positive stuff. And it's kind of show that I had good intentions and was not out to, write anything nasty about him. And finally talked to Bonetta one day. And this was toward the end of the writing process. And just out of the blue, he goes, people are going to tell you a lot of stories about drinking with John. And this happened when he was drunk. And those stories aren't true. It's like, well, then why are you bringing it up? And there are definitely some stories, but about John and John Prine being a pretty heavy drinker at one point in his life. And And I touched on that in the book, but that was never, I was never trying to write the sort of scandal, tell all sort of book.
Right.
And so I just based on that conversation, I have to assume that part of the reluctance was they were afraid I was going to sort of paint him as this, crazy alcoholic, wild man or something. And so I think that was maybe an element of it. Also, I've realized over the years that he had a lot of like music journalist friends, and I expect, I can't imagine that some of them didn't approach him about doing a book at one point. And I imagine, if he told them no, he's not about to tell some stranger yes.
Right.
So there was probably that angle, and who knows what all the elements were there. But that was a frustrating experience. I feel like I got a lot of good information, but there were several times where I would call somebody and to talk about interviewing them for the book, and they would go, "Oh, that sounds like a great idea. Let me ask John, or let me ask Al Albinetta," and then I would never hear from them again.
Oh, wow.
So that was actually a concern going into the Doc Watson book. I told my editor, it's like, I don't want to do that again. I don't want to go through that experience where nobody's cooperating and I'm just really hitting a lot of dead ends. So
Sure.
so fortunately it was dramatically better with the Doc book. Not 100% cooperation from every last person, but I'd say 90+% of the people I wanted to talk to, I was able to talk to. So, and several people have died since I talked to them. So I'm really glad
wow.
glad I kind of got in under the wire with some of those folks. Like I mentioned John Cohen and Mac Wiseman, the legendary bluegrass singer, and several people like that I talked to before they were gone. So that was, nice to feel like I made that happen.
For sure. So before I get to the broadest question that I think I knew I would ask you,
Yeah.
A step toward that might be, what is it about these two subjects that drew you? Why did you pick these two guys to write these first two books about, John Prine and Doc?
I didn't totally pick them. They were the Prine book Prine more than Doc. David Minconi, who I've known for 30 years, he was longtime music critic for the Raleigh News and Observer. He was one of the editors for the series that the Prine book was a part of. It's University of Texas Press, the American Music Series. And he basically just emailed or called me one day in 2012 and said, "I've got a book series going. You should pitch something to us." And I looked into what they were doing, and they had a book on Dwight Yoakam and Merle Haggard, and I was just trying to think, who's somebody that would kind of fit. And he probably mentioned a couple other projects, titles, subjects they had in the works, and I was just kind of trying to think, number one, who's somebody that would kind of fit what they're looking for, and who's somebody I like, who's somebody that has an interesting life, just kind of within that sort of those parameters. I was trying to find a good subject. And Prine just seemed like a pretty obvious choice.
Yeah.
And also, one thing I've told people, it's like, one factor is it sounds a little silly in some ways, but it's like, I'm going to have to listen to these people's music a lot for like 2 years or more.
Yep.
I want somebody that I can like really enjoy listening to their music for a long time.
It's legit.
Yeah. So, not just liking them, but somebody I could really kind of live with their music for a lot of time. So that was a factor as well. So neither one of them was like, oh my God, that this is a mission. I've always wanted to write a book about these people. It was not that kind of thing. But so anyway, the Prine book, that's how that happened. And then with the Doc book, my editor is named Lucas Church. He is a Boone native, and part of it was he wanted a Doc book, and he wanted a book about the mountains where he was from, and he liked the Prine book, and he approached me and said, would you be interested in doing a book about Doc? And I was like, yeah. How could I turn that down? It's not something I'd ever thought about, but Doc is a huge figure in American music, folk music, North Carolina history, North Carolina music. So this is just having that kind of subject handed to me on a platter. I really couldn't turn it down.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that takes me to my broad question, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, I've known you as a music journalist for writing things about the local scene here, including about my releases and stuff.
Yeah.
Why music? Why was that your subject? Why is that what you write about?
The the simple answer is the Rolling Stone record guide. When I was in high school, I borrowed a copy of the original Rolling Stone record guide, which came out in the late 70s. Borrowed it from a friend and was just fascinated by it. I'd always liked music, but was kind of, not a real serious music fan. And, I'm pretty embarrassed at some of the records I bought when I was a young teenager, and just, did not have very discriminating tastes. And this book, it was funny and fascinating and just extremely opinionated. There are things in there in that book that make me cringe going back and looking at them now. But just as they kind of hit me in the, hit me where I lived as a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, whatever I was at the time. And just opened the doors. I didn't know anything about punk rock. I really didn't know much about, like the British invasion. I mean, I knew the Beatles. I knew the obvious hits by the Stones, but just opened me up to, really got into the Who because of that book, got into Neil Young, just the Kinks, which I'm still massive Kinks fan. Just lots of stuff that I knew little to nothing about before that book. And then like they had I think it had kind of a bibliography in the back, and that led me to other books, and just, it just kind of opened the doors into that world that I don't think I would have experienced, or definitely had not experienced before that otherwise.
Why?
And loved music too, obviously. So just that sort of combination of good writing about music and loving music, that just seemed like an obvious thing to put together.
You already loved music by the time you read this book?
Oh yeah. But like I said, my tastes were pretty broad, mainstream. I was a big Barry Manilow fan when I was like 13 or whatever.
I mean, weren't we all?
Yeah. So just had to kind of learn and like just didn't understand punk rock, didn't understand a lot of R&B. Just there's a lot of stuff I just kind of had no context for and had not listened to. Or like classic country music, I didn't grow up with that. And George Jones, Merle Haggard, people like that. It just opened my mind to a lot of people like that I had either not thought about or just had been dismissive of before, and just kind of opened up this big wide world that I didn't really know was out there.
How old were you think?
I'd say probably 16, roughly. Yeah, because I started hanging out with a band. I didn't play anything. I played drums briefly in the middle school band, but just had some friends that had a band, so I just go hang out and kind of be their groupie and hang out in the practice room, and so that was a part of it too. Just talking music with those guys, and just kind of absorbing, just sort of seeing what that was all about.
Did that attract you? What it was all about?
Oh yeah.
The whole vibe of being around musicians.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I still have tons of musician friends.
Yeah.
And just like creative, interesting people. So.
Were you an avid reader at that time too?
For sure. Yeah. I was probably much more serious about literature as a teenager than music early on. Read tons of classic stuff, Mark Twain, and trying Catch 22, and just trying to sort of all the the classics you read in school or hear about, To Kill a Mockingbird, stuff like that. But I was a big Stephen King fan in middle school. I remember reading The Stand 3 times in a row. It's like 800-page book.
Yeah, that's one of the honking ones, ain't it?
Yep. So just it was just really, and was like heavily into comic books. So just lots of different types of literature. Captivated me early on. Mad Magazine, loved Mad Magazine as a kid. National Lampoon, which I had to sneak in the house because my parents would kill me if they found it was pretty. It's a pretty horrifying magazine in some ways. If you go back, I don't know if you've seen. There's a great documentary. It's something. Fast, Out of Control, and Dead, or I can't remember the title. It's a catchy title, but there was a lot of like looking back. There was a lot of like really racist, offensive stuff in there, but there's also just a lot of like really cutting, dark humor, and just I just was attracted, and Monty Python, just was attracted to just kind of edgy, at the time, stuff that was very different from my little Baptist Burlington, North Carolina world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know that feeling.
Yeah.
And I guess I can understand that attraction, but it just sounds like, I mean, hearing you talk about all that, sounds like you had like a vivid mind or imagination or something. And like, I don't know what that means, but I'm fascinated by this idea that reading this one book put you on this path, because I know you as like a serious music enthusiast or
Yeah,
something, and
yeah,
like somebody who like I've watched you tell my story. I've watched you understand to a degree what I'm doing and what
yeah,
I'm like trying to say,
yeah,
and to the degree that you can actually communicate it to other people. And that's like a weird skill to have. You have to
yeah,
really know
yeah,
you have to know what the hell somebody's talking about to be able to do that.
for sure. Yeah,
So it's pretty
yeah,
cool, I guess, that you managed to like embody this passion in this way.
yeah. Well, and part of it's just longevity. I definitely didn't really know what I was doing when I started, but I've been doing it for almost 40 years now. So it's
Yeah.
I guess I've learned a few things along the way, and reading lots of music journalism, just sort of learning the language, learning the tricks of the trade, and just doing it, just putting myself out there, because I remember it being really hard to. I was just incredibly nervous when I started interviewing musicians, and just that whole sort of imposter syndrome. Just are they going to realize that I don't really know what I'm talking about? That kind of thing. So. But yeah, I'm glad you feel that way about what I've written about your stuff. And
Oh yeah, the thing you wrote about life lessons was one of my favorite pieces. I think
nice,
anybody
nice.
ever wrote about something I was up to. It
Yeah.
just I think really captured at least the chaos I felt like I was experiencing
Yeah,
or something like that.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. Damn. What was I about to ask you? But writing though, I mean, like a lot. Like I guess different people come up reading or watching movies or listening to music. But how did you? At what point did you say, you know what, I'm going to start actually like writing words down about this stuff, and not just talking to musicians about it, but actually like doing it and pursuing it?
Yeah. I remember wanting to do. I was editor of my high school newspaper my senior year, and did a lot of that kind of thing. I remember wanting to do record reviews there, and they wouldn't let me. But just basically once I started paying attention to music criticism, I wanted to do it. And at first, that's kind of all I wanted to do, was just like review stuff. It almost didn't occur to me to to sort of be an interviewer and do profiles of musicians at first, and that kind of came a little bit later. But and it just like I remember one thing. This is kind of embarrassing, but my friend Phil and I used to go see shows in Raleigh a lot when we were in high school. And we got in a big argument one night coming back from a show about whether the Beatles or the Kinks were the better band. And I told you I'm a Kinks fanatic, so I was taking the Kinks side, which is kind of ridiculous. But that's what you do when you're 17 years old and got all the time in the world to argue about stupid stuff. So,
Yeah.
But I remember like actually writing, like sitting down and writing out, like handwriting this whole essay about why the Kinks were better than the Beatles, just because I wanted to make that argument back then. But it started, I guess it really kind of started when I was in college, and just started writing for there's a little kind of weekly in Chapel Hill called The Phoenix that I wrote for a little bit, and then started writing for the main paper on campus, the Daily Tar Heel. And, mostly, actually, I guess I started doing interviews pretty early on, but mostly reviewing concerts. I remember reviewing Lou Reed and the Replacements and the Hoodoo Gurus and all kinds of people. That was I think the guy from Dave Faulkner from the Hoodoo Gurus, I think, was the first person I ever interviewed. And so Australian guy. So that was, like I said, some of those interviews were pretty nerve wracking, and especially it's like my first interview, and this guy's from Australia. I just remember feeling like just way over my head early on.
As in, like as a journalist, is that what you mean?
What as a journalist?
Over your head as a journalist?
Yeah. Just I mean, I was 19 years old or whatever I was at the time, and just had barely done anything like this. So it was just it was all just very, very new and intimidating to me, and I took it very seriously too. So I didn't want to screw it up. So I definitely felt like there was something at stake. It wasn't just it wasn't a lark. It wasn't something I was doing just for the hell of it.
Yeah. Were you at school for journalism?
I went there planning to major in journalism, and one problem I ran into was the prerequisite for all the other journalism classes was an 4-hour 8 o'clock class, and I didn't want to take a 4-hour 8 o'clock class, and I kept putting that off, and finally decided, I can just basically decided to I double majored in history and English. And I just felt like, I can write without a journalism degree.
Yeah.
So, which is, I had a lot of stupid reasons for doing and not doing things, but that was a big part of it. And I don't know, I kind of liked just, getting more into literature and, I've always been a big history buff. I just kind of liked it, doing a deeper dive into some of those things. And I guess journalism felt more like what's the word for it? Not craft is not quite the word I'm trying to think of, but it, almost like sort of professional training. I was more interested in sort of, just learning as much as I could about a variety of things and less about the sort of professional training aspect of
like there's
college.
a specific discipline to that kind of journalism.
Yeah.
And
also just I ended up having to do a lot of straight journalism early on, but that was really not what I was interested in. I didn't want to go cover school board meetings and city council meetings. And then, I did it anyway because I had to pay the bills. That was not the kind of thing I was really interested in learning about and pursuing.
Yeah.
So.
I would imagine 8 a.m. for the average, straight journalist or whatever. Like that's like 10 a.m. to the rest of us or something in some ways. Kind of like cameramen with news companies. It's just like, you have early days.
Yeah.
So you gave up that aspect of the career almost.
Yeah.
For
there are things I definitely could have used some of that training. I think there were. I always kind of got by on my writing. I would do really well in classes sometimes just because I could write good papers. I might, a lot of times would feel like I didn't necessarily have the subject grasped that well, but I could write about it pretty well. So that was kind of my saving grace with a lot of things over the years.
Journalism was what I wanted to go to school for, really. Well, journalism or creative writing.
Okay.
But I didn't really go to school for very long for either one.
Yeah.
I went to Guilford Tech for a while for music business, but then I was like, nah, I'm just going to go start playing music.
Okay.
And sometimes I mean, the times that I have thought back on the path, I have wished that I had gone to school for journalism. That's like the thing I feel like I missed out on.
Yeah. Something
about observing and being able to talk about what you observe is it's something I've still learned how to do within songwriting, but you can probably never master that too much. I'm very curious maybe what the deepest aspects of those, what a program like that might consist of.
Yeah. I'm not the one to tell you.
Yeah.
And I imagine it's changed a good bit. Just, a lot has changed with journalism, a lot of it for the worse since I was in college. But anyway, so talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about your background on how you started doing that, writing about music yourself.
Sure. Like for the relish or whatever.
Yeah, just anything.
Yeah, I forgot. I guess I could say I wrote about music or something. Well, so writing was this was weird. I will tell you this. This sounds odd. I'll just tell you this. So long story short, I missed a year of school one time when my parents' life was kind of in disarray.
Yeah.
I kind of missed a lot of a gap where I think that, like in a developmental time.
Okay.
Also, I have really bad eyes. Two important details that landed me in a position where in elementary school they thought I couldn't read and stuff.
Wow.
And I believed them. I was like, okay, I guess I'm fucking stupid or something. Like I don't know. I tested very poorly in reading and reading comprehension and stuff. So I ended up in a class, a learning disability class, to tell you the truth, which was like in the Department of Writing and creative writing and stuff.
Yeah.
A lot more special attention, and I just excelled in that. Excelled at being the least in the department of school where you're considered to be excelling the least.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if it was the extra attention or the pace of it, but I just kind of found out that writing was something that made a lot of sense to me, and it was a good way to, I don't know, get people to understand what I was saying, and I just fell in love with it.
Yeah.
And that was like 5th grade or something.
Well, especially if you're coming from that, sort of being underestimated and treated like you weren't very smart, to go from that to, being able to express yourself really well. I would imagine that's really empowering.
I think that's why I was drawn to it.
Yeah.
I think I felt like I had to compensate for that, for this idea that that I couldn't understand what I was reading. And truth be told, when I would take those reading comprehension tests, I wouldn't read any of it. I would just start with the questions and start skimming to see if I could find some of the answers.
Huh, okay.
So of course I didn't comprehend anything I read because I didn't read any of it. But I probably had a bit of a chip on my shoulder concerning my intellect for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So, I leaned into writing, and I would write essays for fun, and I really got a thrill out of. We had a grading system or a judgment system that went up to a 5, and a 5 was the best you could get on a paper in elementary school or whatever.
Yeah.
So I got a real thrill out of writing things that my teacher would kind of be like, "This is 5 through and through," or whatever. And I'd be like, "Hell yeah, it is. You're telling me." So I carried that around with me all through middle school and even into high school. I was trying to write novels, and this was before I ever played guitar. I played drums as a kid. I didn't really start playing guitar till later in high school. So writing was really my passion. And when I was in high school, I started a creative writing club, and I ended up being one of the editors of the newspaper in high school and stuff. It was almost, I went to a creative writing camp at UNCW, actually.
Okay.
That was a thrill for me, so that exposed us to all this different writing, like journalism and poetry and novels and or fiction.
How old were you when you did that?
I did it for 2 years. I was 16 and 17.
Oh, I would have loved something like that. That's great.
It was awesome, man.
Yeah,
and it was, college kids were running it, and you got away from the parents for a week or whatever. And it was exciting. It was like, oh my God, this is what college will be like.
Whole new world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember some girls that were there just probably out being in trouble or something. And they were like, do you like to party and stuff? And I was like, yeah, I like to have fun. And they were like, do you want to sneak out tonight and smoke cigarettes? And I was like, no, I don't think that's a great idea.
Yep.
It was art writing. That was my rebellion. I didn't really need to sneak out a window of a dorm room or whatever.
Sure.
So anyway, that led to eventually I became a musician, all this stuff. But one day when I was receiving a grant from the Arts Council, I ran into Lynn Felder at the reception ceremony or whatever. And I don't know how maybe we did a little small talk or something, and she mentioned being at the Relish, and I was like, I've always wanted to freelance. I've always wanted to get into some journalism stuff. And she said, well, Ed Bumgardner used to do that for the paper, and maybe I could picture you doing something like that if you want to try it out. So she just gave me a shot.
Nice.
I got to write, I got to interview Rusted Root. I got to interview Chris Stapleton.
Okay.
And of course, I think I did a piece on Doug Davis and Sound Lizard and so different things.
If you write about
around
music
town.
in Winston-Salem, you got to write about Doug sooner or
Absolutely.
later.
He's got something going on every week.
Yep,
You have to cover one of them.
Yep.
That was it. It was just kind of a lucky meeting Lynn, and they just, for some reason, were willing to work with me. I mean, I'm sure I sent them examples of my work and a resume of sorts, but I didn't have any formal journalism experience. They just kind of were very cool about giving me an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, Lynn's a good person. I miss working with her. I was talking about the changes for the worse in journalism, and Lynn getting laid off from the Winston-Salem Journal is definitely one of the things that's disappointing in recent years.
Yeah,
but I'm glad you got that opportunity.
I've been kind of watching what the internet and what different things extending from the internet have done to music. And what comes to mind lately is the whole TikTok thing and even Instagram and Facebook. Has a similar evolution or maybe de-evolution taken place with journalism? Do people read less now?
Oh, Lord, yeah. People read, bites on social media, but I think people read very little long form journalism anymore. And newspaper, it's like only old people read newspapers, unfortunately. And it's also just, it's a combination of people not reading nearly as much, I think, and also just sort of the business model of newspapers has been destroyed by the internet. Like, like Craigslist kind of made classifieds irrelevant. And then, like, you used to always have these huge pages of like car dealership ads and real estate ads. Internet made that irrelevant. Just all these things that funded newspapers, just kind of the internet took away. For, it became something you could just do yourself just as well or even better without having the newspaper as sort of the middleman. And so, just all those things. And then there's been all sorts of, corporate consolidation and, there have been, I've heard allegations that a lot of media companies these days buy up newspapers just to buy their property. Like, a lot of them have valuable downtown properties, and that they're more interested in the property than they are in the journalism, which I can't help but think there's some validity to that. Just there's been a lot of different things that have kind of undermined traditional newspapers over the years, and I've kind of watched it just dive bomb. I feel like since I've, I think about that sometimes when I started writing for newspapers in the 80s. It's like you could go anywhere in the country and get a newspaper job. They weren't very hard to find. It's kind of like being a journalist was like being a nurse or a teacher. It's like you go anywhere, there's going to be jobs. Like they're not going to pay shit, but you can find work. You can go out there and practice your craft. But that's just not at all the case anymore.
You know as well as I do in music that there's sort of this revival of, I think, like retroism in a way. And now, like, if you put out vinyl, it's a pretty, not that it's very profitable to put out vinyl, but people want that physical thing sometimes compared to CDs or tapes or whatever.
Or streaming.
I mean, like, I get exposed to more stuff via streaming than I do. Like, if I really love something, then I'm going to buy it on vinyl. Is there anything like that in terms of like the magazine world or the book world that is a similar thing in the literary world? Like, is it as significant in the same way or whatever to put out a book or to write for a magazine that comes out every month or something?
Well, I really like having, physical copies of my books out there, but I do almost all my reading on my Kindle app on my phone.
Really?
Now. So I'm as guilty as anybody else of not supporting sort of the physical product. It's because it's so easy. I've got a book with me everywhere I go now.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to think. And physical magazines are definitely going away. Like Entertainment Weekly just stopped publishing recently after 30 plus years. And, it's and I don't know if there are definitely people that sort of fetishize print books. I know a lot of people that are still very devoted to buying print books. Yeah, but I feel like that's a very kind of narrow group of people that people who do read. I expect most people read books on Kindles these days.
Yeah,
or equivalent.
I mean, that's really interesting because there's a question in there that I've been trying to figure out for a while, what that kind of means about the trajectory of these crafts. And, I mean, there's a pretty it's not like you and I will come up with a new answer that's going to really solve it for the rest of the world, but.
Well, what are we doing here then?
Yeah, good question.
That's what I came here to do.
Yeah, well, okay, maybe we will. I shouldn't be so negative.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, there's a question there of just like what path we're on.
Yeah.
And, I don't think, I sometimes think if we can't figure this out one way or another, I think the path we might be on, and you can tell me what you think about this, I wonder if we're on a path where art and the consumption of art becomes free for people to consume, and where if it is financed, which it won't necessarily be, but if it is financed, that it will be through things like strictly sponsorship and ad revenue that's associated with art and platforms and whatnot.
Yeah, quite possibly. Because definitely a lot of the old models no longer work for how to make money out of art.
Yeah.
And especially, yeah, it's like, I totally get it. I mean, if you can get everything for free, it's hard to make yourself pay for something, or for just, that $5 a month Spotify subscription or whatever it is. It's, it's hard to go out there and spend $25 on a vinyl record or
Yeah.
anything else when it's so accessible now. I'm sorry, I kind of lost the thread. What was your
When you're on Kindle,
question? Yeah.
when you switch a page on Kindle,
Yeah.
will it occasionally show an advertisement?
Like I said, I just do the app on the phone, so it doesn't on the phone app. I'm not sure about an actual. I don't have Gwen, my partner, has an actual Kindle. I don't know if they do on the actual Kindle devices or not.
I wonder. I don't know the answer to that either.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like what we're looking forward to in the future, if there's money affiliate, if there's money that is associated with art, which this is another thing that I think people don't like to acknowledge a lot of the time, but it's only been it's only been maybe almost 100 years or something that the idea of making money from the arts has been as maybe the obvious priority that it has been.
Yeah.
Like there was a time before all this where art wasn't necessarily the commodity that it is, and that we still did it, especially in the early stages of art. Like we did it anyway. It's just nice to be able to do it professionally. And so if that's what we're trying to do, I think that it's going to be like, I don't know, you'll experience all music for free, but if you're a professional musician, you'll basically have a bunch of sponsorships and endorsements, and that's the only way you'll make money from it.
I would love to. I would love to live in a country civilized enough that there was government money to pay artists, and to help make that happen. But that's we seem very far from that in the U.S. these days. I've got I know a Canadian woman who was able to put out her first novel, and basically it was sort of government funded in Canada. And I just think that I get the impression that there are parts of the world where that's much more, you have much more sort of public support of the arts than we do here. But I've also thought about with newspapers and with music and a lot of other things, I'd love to see some kind of just subscription service, just kind of like, I guess Patreon kind of thing, but maybe in a more less individual kind of way. If there was more of a sort of collective, we all contribute $10 a month to this, and a bunch of writers or musicians or visual artists or whatever, get at least partial, if not enough to make a full living, at least they get some, they don't have to work all the time. They have on day jobs or whatever. They have enough money coming in to support doing their work, doing their art.
That's sort of what I was trying to do with Face Paint, if you remember that.
Yeah, sure.
That project, which was fine, but yeah, I mean, it's all that model does is shift it from, instead of people buying and they do this. It's so weird that this is the case, because it's the same thing. If you go out and buy a copy of Rolling Stone, the profit the part of the money that you spend on that they get back goes into their operation costs. And sure, some of that might be a profit margin, but probably not as much as people think. It costs a lot of money to run that business.
Yeah.
All we're doing, if we switch to a model like that, is making the public know that the money that they're spending is going toward the people that create the thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's all we're doing, is we're telling them that that's what it is. Like your money goes straight to this effort to support this. And funny enough, some people really are attracted to that and will do it, which I think is cool. But yeah, I think models like that are probably going to pop up more and more.
Yeah.
People giving a shit about the principle that there is, because in principle, I don't think people in principle don't agree with the way that things are shaping up with the market. But when it comes to their own convenience and their saved money, that's where it, like you said, becomes the issue. If people don't have to go out and spend that $25 on vinyl, they're not going to.
Yeah. And, probably you, me, a lot of people we know don't have tons of disposable income.
Yeah.
It's sort of the physical, books are really expensive now. Vinyl records are really expensive. It's, you kind of have to have a lot of disposable income to be a regular consumer of those things. And it's just not, there was a time when a lot of that stuff was, sort of the dime store. What's the phrase? But like the pulp fiction, like early sort of detective novels would cost a dime, which, was a lot more back then than it is now. But it's just, a lot of art was pretty disposable and pretty, just very affordable by the average person. And I feel like, with books, records, concert tickets, you name it, it's like all that stuff is really expensive these days. It's hard for people to which again, I think goes back to why people do things like streaming or just downloading or whatever. It's cheap and easy, and it's a natural thing to do.
Which is a really fair thing to point out, because in that way, I mean, like if things like Pandora and things like Spotify, if there hadn't been a demand for those things, then maybe they wouldn't exist. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, like we've had a very long history of a lot of people, the upper echelons of the arts industry. So specifically, I'm talking about music. We've had a very long time of people being at the top of that mountain and making a lot of money.
Oh yeah,
and really other people not really having the same access to the platforms and stuff that your music can exist on. And
the gatekeepers kept a lot of people out of it for a long time.
Absolutely. And it's still, I mean, it feels like there's still a dynamic there that is a lot to overcome, so yeah, I mean, there's a lot of financial greed, whatever, within the arts that probably did produce a lot of this stuff. Because like we said, it used to be kind of a cultural commodity more so than one that was
for sure. Yeah.
Meant strictly for profit.
Yep.
Yeah. So
although the profit stuff goes back so far,
I'm sure.
I mean, there's plenty of just people, just sort of itinerant musicians that would go around and play for parties and things. And that, that's obviously not a big sort of, that's not a career.
Yeah.
But I remember watching an American Experience on Stephen Foster years ago, and the big thing in his era was sheet music. That's how he made his money, was from sheet music sales, because it was pre-recordings. And the sheet music publishers screwed him just as badly as record companies screwed people in the 20th century. So
they always screw people.
Yeah.
Damn it.
So
what about, you might be the dude that knows the answer to this. Like when we think of these icons like Johnny Cash, Dog, John Prine, Bob Dylan, I wonder if do you think these guys set out? I mean, I think we know these. I know the answer to some things, to some of these examples, but still, you can give me your 2 cents on the difference between whether these guys set out for a music career in the same way that like me and my peers did, like if they had the same thing in mind, or if it was like a totally different. Did all these guys even give a shit about that?
I think so. I mean, I think they, they were chasing the dream, I think, and obviously a different approach. Like Dylan versus Cash is a different approach to making it. But I think they all wanted to. They kind of all wanted to be stars. They all wanted to have their voices heard by as many people as possible. I mean, not in a conventional. They weren't trying to be. Frank Sinatra or some just sort of a pop star, but they're, I think, I think that's a pretty big drive, a consistent drive. And I'm not saying, like you and your friends have that same, attitude, but I do think with some of the people you mentioned, there is definitely that element of, I want to take this as far as it can go.
Yeah.
So. I don't know. What do you think?
I feel like I get that impression with a lot of people. Johnny Cash, Sam Cooke. I forget who else I mentioned. I think when I've heard John Prine talk about music, it has been with an attitude of seriousness and business and personalization and like the desire for success.
Yeah.
The question mark for me is Dylan. Like whether I think I have this perception of Dylan that he just showed up at the Newport Folk Festival and accidentally got famous and then changed the world or something.
I've read a lot about Dylan, and he was pretty calculating from the beginning. And
Really?
That's my impression of it. Yeah, I mean, he played in a dance band in high school, and he just kind of. You could never call Dylan a phony by any means, but he also kind of, he knew which way the wind was blowing. He, no pun intended, and just he would, he kind of saw where he could make an impact, and kind of did the folk thing, and then when he got tired of that, he heard the Beatles, and it's like that looks like a lot more fun, and he kind of did it all very much his own way. But I think he always wanted to be kind of a pop star in his own very weird way, and he succeeded. So but with Prine, I think Prine is actually he is an exception to that, though. I mean, I don't think. I think he's kind of like one of the least ambitious people I've ever written about.
Really?
Yeah, I think he was obviously proud of his songs, but it took a long time for him to even kind of think of himself as a songwriter. He would, I talk about in the book, he would say, I made up songs. I would tell people I made up songs, but it's like he thought that was something different from being, Bob Dylan or Pete Seeger or whoever, that those were real songwriters, and he was just a kid that made up songs. And so it took him a long time to think, I think to realize that he was actually a peer of people like Dylan and not just this sort of, hobbyist.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Which is crazy to hear you say. But
And he worked as a mailman, like way up to pretty close to when he actually got a record deal. He was still delivering mail. And some friends basically dared him to go on stage at an open mic night. And that's, he would just kind of play his songs for friends, and his brother was a musician, so he and his brother would mess around with his songs in his bedroom. But it was definitely not like I've got a burning desire to be top of the charts. It was just this kind of a hobby, and he didn't take himself that seriously. And then, but once he started playing the songs in public, he started seeing the reaction, and I think he realized fairly quickly that he had something pretty substantial happening, that it wasn't, that it was more than just a goofy little hobby. But yeah, and he was kind of going off on a whole Prine tangent here.
That's cool.
He was good friends with Steve Goodman, who wrote, most famous for writing The City of New Orleans, which Willie Nelson did a version of it. Arlo Guthrie had a big hit with it. Goodman was never really a star in his own right, but wrote a lot of great songs and was just a kind of larger than life personality. But Goodman really pushed Prine, and I'll talk about that in the book. Goodman had leukemia and ended up dying. He was mid-30s maybe when he died. So you get the sense that he knew, he had a very short fuse. He kind of had to make the most of whatever life he was going to get. And I think he really pushed Prine to go for it. And they ended up, Goodman was opening for Chris Christopherson, I think. I get the people, because Chris Christopherson and Paul Anka were hanging out, which is a really weird combination. Anka was this like 50s pop star and did some really cheesy 70s songs, but he was wanting to get into management. And I can't remember, they were all in Chicago, and Goodman and Prine were from Chicago. But I think it was that Goodman was opening for Christopherson, and Anka was around because he was managing Christopherson. And so Goodman kept bugging Christopherson to come hear Prine sing. And Christopherson kept blowing him off, and finally came over like the last night. They were doing like a 2-week run at a club in Chicago. And finally the last night comes over to hear Prine. It kind of indulged Goodman. And of course was just blown away. Like a lot of the songs ended up on Prine's first album he had already written. And he sang them all for Christopherson and Anka and whoever else was sitting around. And Christopherson made him sing them all again because he liked them so much. And then I think Anka paid for Prine and Goodman to go to New York, and they both got record deals like immediately. Just kind of like falling out of the boat, fish jumping in the boat. I guess falling off a log is the phrase I was trying to go for there. But just very easy, sort of, people chase that dream for decades sometimes, and with Prine and Goodman, it was just, here you go.
Yeah.
Here's a record deal. You're on Atlantic Records with Led Zeppelin and Aretha Franklin now. So yeah, with Prine, it was just. I think he got more ambitious as he went along in some ways, but yeah, early on it really just kind of fell into his lap and was not planned at all. Like I mentioned, Dylan being kind of a schemer and sort of following, looking for ends where he could sort of make an impact. And I don't think Prine was like that at all.
Damn Dylan. That's quite the story. That reminds me of, Ray LaMontagne kind of had a similar pace, just kind of quick lightning bolt. I think he didn't even start pursuing it until he was approaching 30, and then he was in his 30s before he like record anything independently. And then before long, he was on RCA, and it was like without any of what we do now, without this thing, and that's what bothers me. I get it, but it does disappoint me about the model these days. Is like you have to pop on social media before you before a record label will look at you, and now there's even a question of whether it makes a difference if a record label looks at you, and that's cool in a way. It's cool in a way. It's just
I'm sure there are certain people that you really need that, but
there's certain people that you're glad it happens, but. I think the unfortunate thing about it is like that social media is a different game than the craft of music.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
That's what's disappointing is like when you come across somebody on social media and somebody all of a sudden follows you on Instagram or something, you look and it's a musician and their pictures look all great and blah, blah, blah. And you look and they have 200,000 followers or whatever. Yeah. They're really good at Instagram. It doesn't, they might be really good at music.
I was going to say they may or may not be good at music.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's a frustration to me. I'm sure I'm far from the only person who I don't want to be a marketing person. I want to write.
Yeah, I know.
I don't want to be the social media influencer. I don't want to be the marketing guy. I don't want to. It's just like there's so much you're expected to do now, and I would happily turn all that over to somebody else if I was rich and famous. But, and I don't do nearly enough of it as it is, but it's just I just want to do the work.
It's not your craft.
Yeah.
It might work against your craft in some way. That's how it feels for me. I feel dead when I do that stuff. I don't know. Do you have like number one songwriter or the top 5 or 10 that you go to that are like your pride and joys?
Let's see. Well, I've mentioned the Kinks more than once. Ray Davis from the Kinks. Prine, for sure. Dylan. Who else? There's somebody I was just thinking about a minute ago. Jonathan Byrd. I don't know if you know Jonathan's stuff, but I think he's the best songwriter ever out of North Carolina.
Really?
Yeah.
Damn.
Who? I feel like I'm going to leave out 500 people. Sly Stone, I'd put way up there. I'm trying to think of somebody from, not from 60 years ago, too. Well, Jonathan Byrd is contemporary.
Yeah.
But who else? Let me think of another couple. I don't know. There's 50 people that are not coming to mind right now, but that's a short list.
What are the odds you'll ever write a biography on Tom Waits?
It would be interesting. I don't know. I don't know him that well. I like what I've heard, but I've got kind of spotty on, and my friend Lisa will kick me for this because she's a huge Tom Waits fan. I see the Orphans box over there.
Yeah.
It's he's a fascinating character, and I'm sure it'd be really interesting to hang out with him and get his life story. But I kind of he seems like the kind of person that might write a memoir, but I doubt he'd be super cooperative with somebody doing a.
Yeah, I have heard him. I believe he's pretty careful about his image and about all that, and so he probably does. But I wonder if he would write a memoir because, I think he likes the mystery. I think he likes being the shadow figure. You know,
that quite possibly. Did you read Ricky Lee Jones' memoir by any chance?
Mm-mm.
She dated Waits for a while, and she kind of pulls the curtain back a little bit on Waits in the 70s.
So I watched this really long sort of like a biography, sort of like a synopsis of his whole discography
Yeah.
on YouTube one day.
Yeah.
I think it was during quarantine. And they, I think, refer to her book and
Okay.
talk about the first time she met him and how she came. I think that was who it was who came over to his house, and and he had a had a refrigerator in the living room.
Okay.
And she was like, "What's this for?" And he opened it, and it was full of like metal tools, like wrenches and stuff.
Okay.
And he was like, "For tools, there's some pretty cool stuff in here."
So that's his tool cabinet.
Yeah, tool
Nice.
cabinet.
That sounds like a Tom Waits kind of thing.
I think he really is that guy.
Yeah,
And like,
yeah.
you know, some people who just can't be conventional and
Yeah,
normal.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think he really is that dude in a lot of ways.
He's not like Alice Cooper going to the golf course, you know.
Right.
So
Or like, yeah, like, I don't like, and I, one time I saw Marilyn Manson on something, and my dad pointed out to me, he was like, he thought this was like a weird thing.
yeah.
But somebody asked him, like, someone referred to his wardrobe on stage as a costume.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, sure, but you're wearing like jeans and a rock and roll t-shirt and like tennis shoes. Like, you're wearing a rock and roll costume.
That's your costume.
You know, everyone does.
Yeah.
Like, people dress for a particular identity, and
Yeah.
I'm dressed as a thing that symbolizes that on stage or whatever. And yeah, I think that's true. And
I remember, I think it was Jeffrey Dean Foster, the Winston-Salem musician, said one time that Manson actually, like, that Marilyn Manson would kind of require everybody to, like, he didn't want people who were faking it, that, you know, you'd kind of have to stay in persona off stage. I'm trying to remember the way he put it, but it's like you were kind of expected to, you know, embrace the lifestyle and not just, you know,
Which is yeah,
act it out on stage.
which is very method and interesting.
Yeah.
Like, when it comes down to it, I struggle with this a lot, man, because like, we do see that there is an identity of a musician, and it's not just for comfort, and it's not just like, I wear this, you know, whatever. I wear this style of boots because it's so utilitarian, or I wear this hat because it protects my neck from the sun,
Yeah,
or whatever. Like, no, these things aren't just natural products of who we are all the time. And sometimes I feel in conflict with that, because I'm trying to figure out, well, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, well, I was going to say that this brings up your whole, you know, you kind of went from the sincere singer-songwriter thing to that, you know, sort of going in a little different persona, different direction, at least for a while. I'm not sure what you've been up to just recently, but I guess that was sort of maybe pre-pandemic. You started doing a little more character-driven songs and dressing a little different and playing with a band, and just, you know, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, man, I remember back in the day when I was like the earliest days of the trio, we didn't give a damn what we looked like. Like, and I thought that was true.
Yeah.
And I think now, looking back, I'm not sure how true it was, you know, but
You were trying hard to look like you didn't give a damn. Maybe.
yeah, like maybe that was, and I resented that idea so
Yeah,
much. Like,
yeah.
I remember moments of that. I remember like not wanting to know that was true. So wanting to believe that what I was doing was just pure nature or something.
Yeah.
And I remember like I had this hat I would wear that had a hole in it, and my mom was like, "Why don't you get a different hat?" And I was like, "This one's fine." And she said something like, "It's your look" or something. And I was like, "Ugh, like don't acknowledge that."
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
no, I'm just truly me.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
there was
There's
something
nothing calculated about
right.
this. Yeah.
It's all accidental. It's
Yeah.
all pure.
Yeah.
I don't remember what, like, I don't know, man. It felt so undeveloped in a way. And that was how it was for a long time. And then something was born along the way where, I don't know, things started to feel narrower. And it was like, yeah, the end of the trio, we wore some suits for some shows. And I think I was just going through a strange identity crisis around that time. And like, a lot of things were coming to a head. Like, I think when I was younger, I also thought that I was naturally Christian and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then to learn that that wasn't natural either,
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
like put into my mind.
Of
And
course, yeah.
this whole facade,
You
I
don't grow
think,
up around here without being heavily, and even if your family's not religious, you're going to absorb a lot of it, I think. And if your family is religious, you're really
really
going to
going to.
absorb it. So, yeah.
It definitely is a huge part of the culture that surrounds us all the time. And, even like, I don't know, the degree to which we're polite to one another, expected to be in society, whether you wave at neighbors and stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, if you don't, if you're seen as some kind of asshole, then that's not being godly or whatever.
No.
I think a lot of that stuff was starting to fall apart for me. Of course, I went from being religious to like not being religious at all. And then I think I went from this state of mind of being like, not like I don't have to be in control of my identity. I'm just like naturally who I am, to then feeling like, well, I have to like take control of my identity. So then I started wearing the suit on stage, and the show got different, the songs got different. It wasn't so much about experiencing and observing life so much as like writing a message about male sexuality and about like whether you're going to embody the sort of the motivations of the left side of the spectrum or the right side of the spectrum, and aggression or non-aggression, and all this stuff, trying to figure out who my identity was actually supposed to be. And that it wasn't a very comfortable project. It wasn't a very comfortable exploration.
Yeah.
It felt pretty, I don't know, impossible in a lot of ways. And it got dark in a lot of ways. And so then I put out an album called Devil. And I think that was like the end of it all.
Okay.
And it was after Devil, because with Devil, I just kind of like, I reached this point of, I'll tell you, it was like the, what is the term? Pinhead or something. It was like the point at which everything came to from this whole change. And one time when I was in the midst of all this like atheism stuff and acting all bombastic, I guess, about like how not Christian I was, how like countercultural I was, I had this dream that, to save on details, I guess, I had this dream that I legitimately met the devil.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that like it fucked me up. It scared the hell out of me.
Yeah.
I had multiple dreams about the devil, and it was like my mind was confronting the fact that I was like this pursuit of mine, or this like the way I was expressing myself around this time was like insincere, or like didn't know what it was talking about.
Okay.
So this Devil album was kind of about my personal stuff with love and with different things, but also kind of acknowledging this reality in the world that is cruel and mean and like can't be laughed at or fucked with or whatever in the wrong way. Like it's a real danger. And I think that to me, for some reason, that was something really important to my identity that I needed to acknowledge about the world before I could move on or something. And since then, I feel
kind
as
of
though
like you're playing with fire a little bit. Is that?
Yeah, I think so.
Am I getting the gist, or not?
I think like.
Am I understanding what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I think it was something like. It's hard to explain, man, but it's like I know what it felt like to experience it, but I think basically it was something like integrating my understanding of danger and mortality and like the reality of my own mortality, integrating that into myself and letting that be a reality. I think my aggressive side was like aggressive toward the wrong things.
Okay.
And then through this time period and different experiences I was having, I was trying to learn how to like understand that life is finite and like what I do makes a difference or something. Yeah. And I wrote this song "Devil and a Dead Man" that's like been out since almost a year ago. That was like when I first started talking to you about coming over here.
Yeah.
Devil and a Dead Man was kind of the crucial piece from that album, I think. And it was really just an acknowledgement of something like there's a reality that we don't like to acknowledge. And it could come take all of us out. It could, any of us, if we fucked with it the wrong way, it would like put us in our place immediately.
Yeah.
What do you do with that knowledge? Like when you know that, you're a lot more careful. Maybe life isn't all just about being carefree and being spontaneous and not giving a shit and thinking that you're invincible.
Yeah.
That's it. That's what I've been trying to get to.
Okay.
I know I went the long way around the barn, but
all right.
there's something about, I think when you're young, you don't fully grasp your mortality. And there's something about like fully grasping danger and threat that I think makes you grow up a little bit.
Yeah.
It makes you see shit as like, it makes you, it wakes you up a little bit more to the realities of life.
And affects the way you treat other people, I think, quite a bit. Yeah. Well, and that's, I think, one thing that can be tricky with, life in general or creative stuff is like, on the one hand, you don't want to just be sort of, sunshine and puppies and kittens and just, pretend everything's all, light and happy all the time. But on the other hand, it's like, there's enough bad shit in the world that I don't want to add to it. I don't want to make people miserable.
Yeah.
And so sort of trying to find the balance of, doing good in the world, putting good out in the world without being, sort of, acknowledging the dark side, but not sort of amplifying the dark side. Or I don't know if I'm articulating that very well, but
maybe breeding the dark side or something. Yeah. I think there's some, that's real. And I think too, it sounds a bit cliche maybe, but the sunshine and rainbow stuff, it's like maybe there's a higher level of innocence or happiness or something that you can reach, but you can't reach it without, you will appreciate it more if you know what it means to acknowledge the dark side of the world.
Sure, I think
I
there's
know
a lot of
people,
truth to that. Yeah.
People say that stuff all the time and just kind of take it for granted, but like doing some work, I think, for me to understand it truly, that's what some of this was about, was like, I mean, at the time I was reading, this was in a time where I was reading the Gulag Archipelago. Yeah. Like I was interested in some writers and some thinkers who were exposing me, I think, to realities that even still we're having a hard time in the culture contending with. We're having a hard time being willing to acknowledge that there's restraints in life and that like there's dangers in life that cannot be wished away.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think for me it was like, okay, I have to accept at this point that there's dangers in life that can't be wished away. And I think that's made me, I mean, it's made me a lot more sentimental. It's made me a lot more like I don't know, when I see something that warms me up, it makes me a lot more likely to like shed a tear over it or something.
So maybe a little more vulnerable, a little more emotionally open, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so. Which COVID also influenced.
Well, yeah, there is that.
Yeah.
Well, actually, one thing that what you were just saying reminded me of, I told you I was listening to your conversation with Tori Elliott on the way over to your place today. And you were talking about just sort of, I know she mentioned the word existentialism a couple of times, sort of existential crises. And one thing that's really hit me the last couple of years is having pets. And it's like, if my brain starts going down some really dark, trying to understand the universe or trying to understand, dark forces or whatever, it's like, I'll stop and think, does my dog ever worry about that? Does my cat ever worry about that? No. And I remember a quote, I have no idea where I got this from, but it was like from a memoir or something that somebody was saying, like they were trying to explain to their grandmother or somebody about, these, trying to comprehend the universe or some really profound thought. And the grandmother goes, why is that any of your goddamn business? I thought, there's something to that. It's like, just don't hide your head in the sand, but don't waste too much of your life pondering shit you can't figure out. And that just, there's much better ways to spend your mental energy, I think, than wallowing in that stuff, I think.
Yeah, I think those are some wise words.
Yeah.
I have this neighbor who's wiser than I, and
Yeah.
one of his catchphrases seems to be, "We don't worry about shit like that."
Yeah. Yeah.
It'll be something stupid, or it could be something big.
Yeah. Yeah.
He, I think, is puzzled by some of my interests and
Yeah.
some of the things
Yeah.
that my head gets wrapped around.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
I don't know. Like one time he let me borrow a hammer, and I let it get rained on, and I was like, "Man, your hammer got rammed. Sorry about that." And he said, "We don't worry about shit like that."
That's a good attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think? Like, I mean, what, how do you pursue happiness?
That's an interesting question.
It's one that I've been meaning to ask more people
Yeah.
because of people like my neighbor who seem to just choose to go that route.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
puzzles me
Yeah.
because I don't know what that's like all the time.
Yeah. I mean, simple pleasures is definitely a part of it. Just, taking my dog for a walk, spending time with Gwen, watching what we do in the shadows, just listening to good music. I think it's not a lot more complicated than that in some ways. And that doesn't mean it always works. I mean, I definitely have my depressive episodes, and, we'll try to find something to make me happy, and nothing will do it some days. And, it's not always just push a button and you're happy. But,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I really do think it's, spending time with my sons. I've got a grandson now, spending time, wish he lived closer, but, just family, friends, pets, hiking, just stuff like that. Going to hear music, listening to music.
Those are all like tried and true methods.
For me, anyway, yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
How about you? Yeah.
that should be, and that's like universal answers right there, I feel
Yeah.
like. And
Yeah.
that's like things that we, let me figure out what I'm trying to say. I feel as though sometimes people want to, like kind of what you were just hinting at, like overcomplicate even the idea of those simple things that we have always looked for. We all have, our species always needs companionship. We need family. Like family is a positive. It creates positive
And
shit in
whether
our brains
it's
usually.
actual family or the family you create.
Chosen. Yeah. Nature seems to be a really positive thing for a lot of people. Like,
Yeah, and that I've learned that in, later in my adult life. Like probably, I wish I'd learned that sooner. Just how important it is just to just go up a mountain sometimes, just get out in the woods. Just get closer to nature.
which that's I don't have an answer necessarily. I mean, I think that's part of it lately. Well, yeah. Lately this year, getting out in my little tiny garden or strolling around in the trees, that's been my pleasure and a way to calm my mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what is your approach to nature? You like to go hiking?
Oh yeah, I love to go hiking. My dog loves to hike, so that's a good excuse. And I've also just tried to be more active, and having a dog really helps with that. Just having to get out and walk the dog every day is a big help with that, and going hiking, because there was a period of my life where I was pretty inactive, and I'm not certainly not a marathon runner these days, but I'm much more active on a daily basis than I used to be, and that really seems to help. It's keep me happy, healthy, on much more of an even keel than when I was not so active. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love. It's one of the things. Little plug for a state park, Hanging Rock State Park. I think is just this amazing resource we've got just down the road here. It's kind of this weird little mountain off by itself, but it's just such a great place to go hiking.
Yeah, I sometimes can't believe it's right here.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
Yep.
All these little mountains here that's standalone mountains, they're so weird, but they just hang out there.
Yeah. But yeah, like doing rail trails, riding bike on rail trails. There's a lot of good rail trails, and especially in Southern Virginia, the New River Trail and the Virginia Creeper Trail are both pretty amazing.
You bike up there?
And play disc golf. And just try to don't have any. Oh, I've been playing tennis a lot lately too. That's been another physical thing I've been doing. My friend Lisa I mentioned earlier, the big Tom Waits fan. She moved down from Baltimore a couple of years ago, and we try to play tennis almost once a week. We don't quite make it every week, but that has been a real joy. I played some in high school, and it's just been great getting back to that after all these years.
I heard we showed a movie at Aperture once about like a club of like senior citizens who played tennis, and the quote affiliated with it with the film was something like, "If you start playing tennis at 60, you'll have 30 years to master the game,"
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
Because tennis is one of the things that keeps you alive, I
Yeah.
guess.
Well, our next door neighbor is, I won't go too deep into my guessing her age, but she's in her 60s for sure, and plays like a lot of senior tennis tournaments and stuff. She just seems just incredibly healthy.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah. Okay, so
and I should check the time. I'm not sure.
yeah, if you've got time, I've got a final question, or if you need to go, we can just call it.
No, I mean, yeah, I'm fine.
Okay. We can wrap it up around this subject. Now that you have this book completed, this, are you going to be in a period of taking a break, or what? What is this time period like for you now that you've got a first draft done, so you're not totally out of the woods, but once it's done, what comes next for you?
Trying to make some money. I've been kind of limping along for. Have to give a shout out to Gwen. She's had to be way more supportive than I would have liked, just because I've done freelance to pay the bills, but I've really had to just dive back into just making some money, because I've gone several years with sort of minimal income trying to get this book done. So would love to have a loftier answer to that, and have some great project I'm working on, but it's really just about kind of getting back on my feet financially right now. That's the big focus.
Yeah. Do you?
And I should mention, speaking of books, there is a new version of the Prine book out.
Oh yeah.
As of late spring, I'm not sure exactly when it came out, but after he died of COVID, of course, in early 2020, he was one of the first sort of prominent people to die of COVID. But at some point after that, my publisher asked me to write an afterword, because the book came out before he died. So just kind of talking about his last album, which was amazing, and his death, and kind of the reaction to his death. And so I did a kind of an extra chapter at the end talking about all that. So that's if you have a copy of the book, you need to go buy another one.
Hell yeah.
Because there's all of this new stuff in there.
Did that one hit you hard?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I hated to see that.
It seemed to hit
Yeah.
I don't know. It hit the world hard.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was actually looking. He was supposed to play Merlefest that spring. I was really looking forward to that. I had not seen him in a while, and was really looking forward to seeing him at Merlefest. Just he's got kids, he's got grandkids now, and just has seemed really happy in his third and final marriage. Just was collaborating with Brandy Carlisle and just a lot of younger musicians, and Casey Musgraves and people like that, and just had hit a really great stride in his life in recent years. And so it's kind of that much more sort of poignant that, it's one thing if somebody's sort of faded and, not really active anymore, and just, like their best years are way behind them. But Prine was kind of right there. I mean, he was like, he had just started a music festival in Costa Rica, I think, somewhere down that way. And, he had a lot going on, and just seemed like a really, really happy, engaged person, and that made it that much more poignant that he died. I mean, it's good that he kind of went out on top in a way, but
yeah,
that much sadder that he was kind of living his best life when he got taken.
Yeah. There's also this weird second stretch that seems to happen in some of these guys' lives, like with. I mean, I guess he is one of three that come to mind of guys like him, maybe more, maybe four, who lived to that age, or who lived to an older age, who have like this, I don't know, this blooming period in their life. John Prine, Johnny Cash, Levon Helm, and even Willie Nelson, who didn't really, I don't feel like ever came back. He just has always kind of stayed at a certain place. But Johnny, Levon, and John Prine,
those are great examples.
Kind of had this second thing, this like legacy sort of establishing period of their careers.
And Prine especially just got was so embraced by like the Americana community and just young songwriters. Just I think he's like a lot of people's favorite songwriter.
Yeah.
And that really became very well known, the last 10 years or so. And that was nice to see.
Yeah.
And Johnny Cash, speaking of Cash, he once said that Prine was one of his 4 favorite songwriters.
Yeah. I think songwriters, he's on up there for me for sure.
Yeah.
Do you listen at all to Daniel Johnston?
I think I know who you're talking about. Really strange guy.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm vaguely, obviously very vaguely aware of who he is. What was that song? It's like Speeding Motorcycle, something like that. I remember a version of that being out there. Anyway, yeah. What about him? He's a guy that I'm, know the name, but not much more.
On the spectrum of types, like individuals who reach a certain level of individuality within songwriting, I think like Daniel Johnston is about as far as you can go without losing. Like Daniel Johnston kind of did lose touch, I think, with the thread that binds us to reality.
Yeah.
I think John Prine is actually as far as you can go without like going into this territory that abandons familiarity.
Yeah.
I think Daniel Johnston.
Prine always kind of seemed to have one foot in both worlds, I think. Just He's very grounded on one hand, but did some really surreal imagery and just,
anyway. Went to places that other songwriters honestly wouldn't have bravery to go, like talking about hairy popsicles in a freezer or whatever. It's like Iron and Wine wouldn't do that. Like Ray LaMontagne wouldn't do that. They wouldn't write the word popsicle in a song. I think he said hairy popsicle anyway. Of course, I was talking to Caleb about this, and he was like, Guy Clark, he had this song where he talked about moldy vanilla wafers,
That's great.
Some people just do it. So, anywho, I don't know, just songwriters. I pray to God that I reach a point in my life where I can be 70 or 80 years old and putting out like the best material I've ever put out.
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable.
Yeah.
Oh, and I said in the book, that's one reason I was glad I got to do the afterword is to talk about that last album because, I thought Prine was done. Basically, I really didn't think he had another good album in him, or even necessarily an album at all.
Yeah.
And then he comes out with, was it The Tree of Forgiveness? I think is the title. And just one of his best albums at age 72 or whatever he was at the time. Hell of a way to go out.
Hell yeah. Well, Eddie, I will wrap us up so I don't take up more of your time than I should.
Thanks, Tyler. I really appreciate it. This has been fun.
Man, I'm glad we finally got to do this.
I feel like I've been pretty rambly. I hope this has been
this is great.
Good conversation.
This is absolutely great. A little bit of trivia for the big for the super fans.
Yeah.
You were originally like my goal or whatever with this was for you to be episode 1.
Oh wow.
And so you're episode, I don't know, 45, something like that. So we finally got you on here, and I'm really glad about that.
Thanks for your patience. Yeah, the book kind of everything got put on the back burner for the last couple of years, especially to get that book done. So.
Yeah, everything. This all turned into something I didn't expect too. I just didn't realize how. In my mind, I was like, yeah, I'll do them every week. I didn't realize what that meant and what it was going to all unfold like. But it's been a blessing, man, and it's been awesome. It's been awesome. So anyway, I'm just stoked that we did this, and like I've said a few times, I want this to be a space where, as things happen, this is a space where people can like kind of tell their story more and more. So if we don't have publications that can do it, I hope that this space will be one that can be useful. So
that's a good thing for sure.
If you, as more things happen in your life, if you want to come back and talk about them, but please come back.
Thanks. Well, especially when the doc book is closer to publication, I would love to talk more about it.
Hell yeah. Well, that's what we'll do then.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks again, man.
Thank you.